ABPG110. #03 Introduction to Psychology in Biological Psychology Edition. What is biological psychology? Biological factors and the body do influence one's behavior, emotions, and cognition. Thus, biological psychology is a comprehensive study that explores the functions of the brain and the nervous system in relation to behavior. Have you ever wondered why twin siblings can behave differently despite living in the same house? In your opinion, is it genetic or environmental factors that influence their behaviors? It is important for us to recognize biological psychology as one of the significant fields of psychology because understanding human or animal behavior will help us to further appreciate who we are as individuals. In order to understand one's behavior and mental processes, we have to rely on the relationship between psychological processes and the underlying physiological events. How do you define biological psychology? The term biology is derived from the Greek word bios, meaning life, and logos, meaning study. Biology is thus the scientific study of living organisms. Basically, biological psychology uses biology as an approach to understand human and animal behaviors. In other words, biological psychology is the scientific study that is primarily concerned with the relationship between psychological processes and the underlying physiological events or the mind-body phenomenon. Biological psychology is also known as physiological psychology, psychobiology, biopsychology, or behavioral neurosciences. What does biological psychology study? A biological perspective is relevant in the study of psychology in two ways. Physiological aspects emphasize the function of the brain and the rest of the nervous system in activities such as thinking, learning, feeling, sensing, and perceiving recognized characteristics of humans and animals. And next is genetic aspects rely on the transmission of traits from parents to offspring through genes and the functional units of hereditary material that are found in all living cells. For example, we may want to know whether high intelligence is inherited from one generation to the next. Neurons and nerves. Biological psychology is concerned with the relationship between psychological processes and the underlying physiological events, otherwise known as the mind-body phenomenon. The main focus of biological psychology is the function of the brain and the rest of the nervous system in activities. It is clear that most of what we think of as our mental life involves the activities of the nervous system and the brain. What is a neuron? A neuron is a nerve cell that makes up our nervous system. The main function of the neuron is to transmit information throughout the body. These highly specialized nerve cells are responsible for communicating information in both chemical and electrical forms. Neurons or nerve cells are found in the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. The basic structure of neurons. Do you know that different parts of the neuron are responsible for specific actions? There are 6 basic structures of neurons, which are nucleus, cell body, axon, synapse, terminal buttons, and dendrite. How do neurons transmit messages? What are messages? Messages are electrical in nature and move within the neuron in one direction. Dendrites, cell body, axon, and terminal buttons. Axons convey information from the cell body and dendrites receive information. The point where the cells meet to relay information between axon and dendrite is a synapse. The information is sent from the axon of the sending cell to the dendrite of the receiving cell by transmission of chemical molecules called as neurotransmitters. A neurotransmitter, which is a chemical that is released from a nerve cell, transmits an impulse from a nerve cell to another nerve, muscle, organ, or other tissue. What are firing neurons? Is based on an all or none law where messages are sent out when triggered, otherwise the neuron remains in a resting state. During the resting state, there is more negative electrical electrical charge in a neuron. Where neuron meets neuron, neurons can communicate without being attached to each other. There are gaps between neurons termed as synapse. A synapse is a chemical connection that bridges the gap between two neurons. There are two types of neurotransmitter: excitatory message and inhibitory message. Introduction to Psychology in Biological Psychology. What is a nervous system? The nervous system of a human being acts as the information gatherer, storage center, and control system. The nervous system is responsible for sending, receiving, and processing nerves, impulses throughout the body. All the organs and muscles in our body rely on these nerve impulses to function. There are two main divisions of the nervous system. Central nervous system consists of brain and spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system, or PNS, consists of autonomic nervous system, somatic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system, and parasympathetic nervous system. The brain and its functions. Do you know that when we see an old beggar on the street, what goes on in our brain which triggers a strong emotional response in us? Which part of the brain has the strongest effect on our emotions? How do you remember the way to your grandma's house? Where do dreams come from? Your brain is responsible for these things and a lot more. Our brain is in fact the big boss of our body. It runs the show and controls just about everything that we do. How do you define the brain? The brain is a part of the central nervous system that includes all the higher nervous centers enclosed within the skull and connected to the spinal cord. The brain has many different parts that work together. There are three main parts of the brain, namely the cerebrum, cerebellum, and the brainstem. What are the main components of the brain? The brain consists of three divisions: the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. The forebrain is the largest division and consists of the cerebrum, thalamus, and hypothalamus. The cerebral cortex is divided into four lobes: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. The limbic system is a complex set of structures that lies on both sides of the thalamus, just under the cerebrum. It includes the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, the amygdala, the pituitary gland, and several other nearby areas. It appears to be primarily responsible for our emotional life and has a lot to do with the formation of memories. Split brain phenomenon. Do you know that the corpus callosum connects the two hemispheres of the brain? Each hemisphere controls the muscles on the other side of the body. For example, the left side of each retina sees the right side of the world and is then routed to the left hemisphere. The right side of each retina sees the left side of the world and then goes to the right hemisphere. About 95% of us have our left hemisphere controlling our ability to speak, while our right is mute. Though controlling the muscles of the other side of the body, the two hemispheres can easily communicate and coordinate if the corpus callosum is intact. What is the endocrine system? The endocrine system is closely related to the autonomic nervous system. It is a chemical communication network that sends messages throughout the nervous system via the bloodstream. In other words, it is a set of glands that produce hormones and release them in our blood. The endocrine system produces hormone chemicals that circulate through the blood and affect the functioning or growth of other parts of the body. Our hormones are actually similar to neurotransmitters. They both affect our nervous system. What is the difference between neurotransmitters and the endocrine system? Neurotransmitters, the release is cell to cell, and endocrine, hormones released into the bloodstream. These hormones regulate the body's growth, metabolism, which is the physical and chemical processes of the body, and sexual development and function. The endocrine system and hormones. What are hormones? Hormones are chemical substances formed in one organ or part of the body and carried in the blood to another organ or part where they exert functional effects. Hormones are released into the different parts of the body slower than neurons and do not move in a specific manner as neurons do, much like radio waves. The pituitary gland is the master gland and main producer of hormones, and it controls the rest of the endocrine system that affects emotions, sexual desire, and energy levels. For example, oxytocin is a hormone that is associated with the feeling of nursing among new mothers and stimulates cuddling. Introduction to Psychology in Biological Psychology. Genetic, psychological explanation at the gene level. Chromosomes. What are chromosomes? Our cells contain chromosomes, which are strands of hereditary material. Chromosomes are long pieces of DNA found in the center of cells. The DNA is the chemical that holds the genes. It is considered the building blocks of the human body. Genes are responsible for controlling the chemical reactions that direct an individual's development. Chromosomes come in pairs. Normally, each cell in the human body has 23 pairs of chromosomes, which is 46 chromosomes in total. Half the chromosomes come from the mother and the other half come from the father. Genes. We know that everyone has two of each gene, one received from the father and another one from the mother. If the pair is the same, it is called as homozygous. If the pair is different, it is called as heterozygous for that particular trait. Our genes are divided into two types, dominant and recessive genes. A dominant gene will show the effects even if you are heterozygous for the gene. A recessive gene will only show its effects if you are homozygous for the gene. There are two types of influences, direct and indirect. Direct influence, a single gene has almost complete control of the outcome. Our environment has almost no effect. Indirect influence, no one gene has control of the outcome. Rather, the genes can influence a behavior by influencing other characteristics that are associated or opposed to it. For example, a gene that makes you inattentive and restless will interfere with behaviors that involve sitting for long periods, such as attending a lecture.